Welcome to this episode of NLN Nursing Edge Unscripted. I'm your host, Dr. Stephen Palazzo, a member of the editorial board of Nursing Education Perspectives. This series highlights the published work from nursing education perspectives and explores how nurse educators are advancing teaching, learning, and the academic workforce. In this episode, we will examine the article Educating to Exhaustion, Intention to Leave U.S. Full-Time Nursing Faculty. This work, led by Dr. Jacqueline Christianson, an assistant professor at Marquette University College of Nursing, whose scholarship focuses on nursing faculty workforce issues, burnout, and work environment dynamics. This article is in the March-April edition of Nursing Education Perspectives. The study addresses a critical issue in nursing education, the growing faculty shortage and the factors driving faculty away from academic roles. The authors explore how work efforts, rewards, and burnout interact to influence faculty members' intention to leave. The findings highlight a concerning reality. A substantial portion of full-time nursing faculty report a likelihood of leaving their role within the next 3 years, with key drivers including burnout, dissatisfaction with rewards, and opportunities for higher salary outside of academia. Faculty often experience high levels of effort, including heavy workloads, overcommitment, and work extending beyond contracted hours. At the same time, rewards such as salary, benefits, and recognition are frequently perceived as insufficient. This imbalance contributes directly to burnout, which in turn plays a critical mediating role in the decision to leave academic positions. I want to welcome our guest today, Dr. Jacqueline Christianson. Hello, how are you?
Hello, I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're very happy to have you here. And let's just get started. So the study highlights burnout as a mediator effect between effort and reward imbalance and intention to leave. How can nursing programs redesign faculty roles to reduce burnout while maintaining academic rigor?
Sure. So, first thing, I think to be perfectly clear, I don't think that faculty burnout and academic rigor themselves are at odds at all. I think it's actually quite the opposite, that academic rigor and faculty burnout are at odds in the sense that some faculty feel that they have insufficient access to ensuring academic rigor as one of the factors for burnout. So, as a little bit of context for this study was a survey, a national survey of nursing faculty who are currently in the nursing faculty role at an accredited college of nursing in the United States. And we actually did two different analyses on this data. The first analysis is the one that's published in Nursing Education Perspectives that you just mentioned. We have a second manuscript that's actually under revision, that's a qualitative manuscript to evaluate not just what the numbers were as far as burnout measures and things like that in the quantitative study, but also how faculty describe their role, what they describe as exhausting, what they describe as things that are invigorating. And we really found in that some of that context helped understand this a bit better. So a lot of faculty really get a lot out of some of the light bulb moments and the aha moments that students get as a part of academic rigor. And they found that they got a lot of energy and fulfillment and felt rewarded by that. On the other side of things, on the opposite end, there's also that a lot of faculty feel that there is some degree of encouragement to lower academic standards or to push students through, and those types of things really sap the passion out of nurse
Yes.
educators. So I personally don't think that academic rigor and faculty burnout are even a little bit at odds. I think that a lot of us go into the academic role with the intention of pushing through nursing students who are excellent and who are well
hmm
prepared for their roles, and that's what we want to do for the most part. I think a lot of places that the academic work balancing act could really be adjusted. There's really a lot of areas that you could adjust multiple different things and address multiple problems at the same time. So, as an example of that, we found one of the big contributors to the efforts variable in the structural equation modeling was how many hours that faculty were reported working weekly, and then also an instrument called overcommitment, or it was a variable called overcommitment, which is basically the idea of how well can you disconnect from your job when you are no longer at work. So, having that work life almost spillover sort of effect. It's something that some of our folks in the qualitative side of things described as well, that the work almost feels like it's never ending and that overcommitment piece is there. On the reward side of the model, though, there's a big contributor to a poor sense of rewards for was service work, which is stuff that's really often under-acknowledged and underappreciated and feels like busy work to a lot of us that we don't really get a lot of acknowledgement for, even though it is necessary and vital work for the college to continue to function. So, as I kind of put it, nobody became a teacher because they love sitting on committees. Um, But yet we still have to do those types of things, and they often take up more and more and more of our time, especially as you
Right.
become an academic who has more experience or who moves up in the academic ranks. So there's a few things that we could do to make that simple example of committees more bearable. Committee meetings could have things like light snacks or a light meal, or there could be better acknowledgement and visibility to what works those committees are doing. So, where I work over at Marquette, we actually had a committee that made arrangements for a Girl Scout troop to come visit our simulation lab, and there was a lot of hurrah about that event, and it was really something that was really uplifting for the whole college, not just the people who are working on that committee. But when committee work is more visible and more glamorous, if you'd like to say, I think that
Hmm.
some of those lack of fulfillment around that work can make it feel less like busy work and more like something that you do get reward out of. Um, if you really want it to be radical, and I'm happy to be radical, you could also consider consolidating committees. A lot of
Yes.
us have noticed that the amount and number of committees at universities and colleges have expanded over the years. And is that really necessary? How often do they need to meet? And really having administrators take a critical look at how much of this work is needed, how much of this work is helpful. That kind of thing can also be really helpful to
Hmm.
making better use of that time.
Oh, well, given what you just said and the satisfaction with rewards, not just salary, strongly influence intention to leave, what non-salary strategies can institutions implement to improve faculty retention? You spoke briefly about committees and giving more recognition to those who are in committees, promoting your committees more, consolidating your committees. But what else would you suggest?
So, first thing to be clear, we talk about salary and non-salary in the manuscript. I don't. The manuscript actually, in our quantitative analysis, didn't find that salary was a big contributor to the
Okay.
efforts or to the reward subvariable specifically. And I think that that is not at all to mean that salary isn't a problem. Salary is absolutely a problem. It's just a different problem for what our structural equation model evaluated. So we were looking at people who had already largely self-selected to take a salary cut to become educators, rather than people who are prospectively looking at becoming an educator. I think that there's likely a tipping point at which one has an idea of why they want to become a nursing faculty. They accept that salary cut and they do so, but then there's a disconnect that happens somewhere in there where you wanted to become a nurse faculty because perhaps you wanted to be a part of educating the next generation of nursing students. But if you feel that there are barriers to doing that, that salary cut that you took seems silly if you look at it and you start to critically evaluate whether this job is working for you or not. And I think that when you're at that point where you're trying to think of what your future looks like, if you're not getting fulfillment out of a job, then the salary cut starts to make less and less sense. And I think that that's where the salary piece really comes in. So I think that's part of why our model didn't capture that piece, in part because the self selection piece is already there. But the reality is that in our study at least, the top reason for intention to leave for the 40% of faculty who reported they do have intention to leave, the top reason was retirement, and about 27% of them indicated they plan to retire. I qualify that as a almost like a non-modifiable risk factor for intention to leave. Ultimately, everybody wants to retire. Either
Right.
you retire or you die in your job, and there's either way, there's turnover in that sense, right? But the second reason was something that's preventable, and that was the salary, was the second top reason. So I think that I want to qualify what I'm about to say about non-salary strategies as I think that they're very important, but I don't think the salary piece can entirely be ignored with this either.
Hmm.
But to actually answer your question, there's a lot of really non-salary strategies that can be used to improve faculty retention. So in the qualitative analysis that really kind of informs some of the other parts of this study, autonomy and the ability to self-determine were really big satisfiers. The ability to try to set most of your own schedule. So when I'm doing grading work, I could do it today or I could do it tomorrow, and having some degree of flexibility was very important to the faculty that answered those questions. Um, on the opposite side of things, the opposite was a detractor for a lot of people. So, participants who felt micromanaged or who felt that college administrators didn't support things like having appropriate boundaries between students and faculty. So, if a student, emails you asking for extra credit and you say no, and then they, continue to harass you about extra credit, not having an appropriate boundary there. If administrators don't support that boundary, then that can be a dissatisfier because it's a limit to your autonomy, right? So the autonomy piece was really important for folks. The other thing that was really the acknowledgement piece and feeling like one's contributing positively to the nursing profession was the other big piece of it. So, and those acknowledgments can really be as simple as just during faculty meetings saying, hey, this particular faculty member got a grant to, a simulation lab grant to fund a new mannequin, or as simple as this person got a publication, or, we made it to the end of the semester, hooray, things like that. But they can be as formal and as complex, I guess you could say, as things like a faculty Daisy Award. The Daisy Award actually does exist for nursing faculty. Our university just started doing it within the last year or two, and it's something that people definitely feel acknowledged and respected out of. Um, Ultimately, I think that leadership in nursing schools really have a big impact on faculty satisfaction, and that the acknowledgement piece can often come from the leadership being willing to acknowledge what faculty are doing and to celebrate those things.
Well, you hit on some very good points there. And when I was reading the article, there was a suggestion made that the effort, reward, and burnout are interdependent rather than isolated factors. So, how should academic leaders like myself approach faculty workload and role expectations differently in light of this interconnected model?
So I think acknowledging that every piece is interconnected with one another is the important part here. And I kind of mentioned earlier that you can really address multiple different components with one or two interventions. So, like I mentioned earlier with committee work, if you reconsider how much committee work you're doing, you could potentially impact not just overcommitment, but in faculty work hours, but also their satisfaction with committee work. If you're getting more done in the one meeting a month versus the one meeting a week, that can be a satisfier for some people. There's a lot of ways that you can find efficiencies in that way, where you have one thing that you're doing that targets multiple different little sub variables, I guess you could call them, at the same time. I think that it's also important to acknowledge that there is no one magic bullet that fixes all faculty burnout problems in one intervention. So
Right.
I mentioned the Daisy Award. I personally don't really feel a lot of acknowledgement out of, getting a kudos in a meeting or something like a Daisy Award personally. It's just
Hmm.
not something that I'm really into. But it very much is something that other people are into. And just
Right.
because I'm not into it doesn't mean that it shouldn't exist. In the same way, I would get a lot out of having reduced meeting hours from doing committee work personally. That's something that I would get a lot of improved reward satisfaction out of, being able to get more done in a shorter period of time than perhaps somebody else does. I'm sure the person that loves committee work does exist out there. So having multiple different things that you're doing that are perhaps all seem small by themselves and are minor changes, those things do add up over time. And I think that really being conscientious about not just trying one thing at a time, but trying multiple different small things at a time can be more impactful than trying to find the magic bullet that I'm not convinced exists.
Well, that's interesting. You say you're not convinced that a magic bullet exists, because I was just going to ask you a question. I mean, we've been talking about this for years, decades, right?
Mhm. Oh,
And
absolutely.
and I'm not sure we've made much progress. And so, what's your sense of, I don't want to say magic bullet, but what's your sense of the main driving force behind this feeling of burnout and this feeling of what many of the educators report? I mean, I hear it wherever I go, right? About this sense of leaving academia. Um, what do you hear? What is your sense?
So I'm a little bit insulated, I will admit. I'm relatively lucky that the place that I work, the satisfaction for faculty is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
That is not the common experience, that said. So I have a little bit of insulation from hearing and seeing outside of this study, unfortunately, or fortunately, I guess. The I think that I think the overall sense is there. Sometimes it can feel very futile to be a nursing
Hmm.
professor, and having mechanisms in place, or other people in place to either air out that feeling of futility or to refute that feeling of futility can really be helpful. Personally, I teach pathophysiology and I used to teach pharmacology as well. They're the classes that a lot of nursing students, frankly, kind of dread
Yeah, I teach
because they're
patho.
yeah, they're allegedly the difficult classes, right?
Yes.
I think they're fun to teach,
Hmm.
because the science is really what attracts me to nursing in the first place, but it can feel very futile, especially when you have a student who is, say, struggling, and you can you can almost see where the problem is, and you can help them try to identify where the problem is. But it's kind of that old idiom: you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make them drink.
Hmm.
And having a space both to acknowledge that and to celebrate when those wins do happen is really important. I think that peer support groups can be really helpful, especially for new faculty, because that feeling of futility in the faculty role is really not terribly different from that feeling of futility when you're a brand new nurse and you feel like you
Hmm.
couldn't do enough. And it's something that you learn to understand better and to internalize less as you get more experience. But a lot of colleges of nursing don't have that transitional piece. They have a peer support group or have an education mentor or things like that. So there's a lot of small pieces that really can contribute to helping people feel more like their work is meaningful, even during times when their work does not feel meaningful.
Well, that's some great insights, and I appreciate you sharing them with us. This is a conversation that's going to continue for, I'm afraid to say, many, many more years and decades, probably. I don't know what the solution is. As you said, you can't take salary out of the equation, but salary is not the only variable in the equation. You touched on autonomy, support, feeling like you're making a difference, acknowledgement, recognition, those kinds of things that also are things we hear from colleagues in the clinical space too. So it seems to be a little endemic to nursing as a general rule, and I'm sure there's other professions too that have similar experiences. But this is great to have the conversation continue. The article was very informative. I enjoyed reading it. I encourage those who are listening to please take a look at Nursing Education Perspectives March and April edition this year and look for the article. And I want to thank you, Dr. Christensen, for joining us. Jackie, it was a wonderful conversation, and we really appreciate your time you spent with us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Just to give an extra little plug to the article, it is open access to those of you who don't necessarily
Awesome.
subscribe or have subscriptions. So please do check it out.